Good morning, everyone. Excuse me. We're up to Parak Hey, Mishna Daled. Sa'ah teruma temeya shenakla temeya sa'ah truma tehira. Okay, we've been discussing until now, over and over again, the fact that if a sa'ah of truma gets mixed into 100 sa'ah of chulin, it's nullified. Now, in this case, we have a sa'ah of truma that was tameh, and previously we had where it fell into chulin that was tahar, chulin that was tameh, chulin being grain that truma is already taken from, it's regular grain. Now our case is where you have a sa of truma tameya, it's impure, and it falls into 100 times more of truma tahara, not of chulin, truma. One sa of truma tameya, of impure truma, fell into 100 sa of pure truma. We have the ratio of 100 against 1. But the mixture here is a mixture of the sa'ah of truma tmeya. The smaller amount is the truma tmeya that fell into 100 times more of truma tahara, not chulin truma tahara. Beis Shammai oisre beis Hillel matirin. Beis Shammai say it's not going to help. The 100 times more will not nullify the truma tmeya. The whole thing, the whole pile has to be treated like truma tmeya. And Beis Hillel says no. Beis Hillel permit, which means according to Beis Hillel, the 100 times truma does nullify the sa'ah of truma tameya. So now the Mishna get into their discussion. What was their discussion here? Amar Beis Hillel Beis Shammai. So Beis Hillel said to Beis Shammai, Hayil utahira asura lezarim, utamei asura lekayhanim. Being that truma that is pure is forbidden to non-kohanim, and truma that's tameya is forbidden to kohanim. Ma tahira oila, just like if truma tahira gets mixed in, it could be raised up, could be nullified. Av tameya sala, so too the impure should be able to become nullified. Meaning, Beis Hillel is making a comparison. We know that if you have truma tahira falling into chulin, so what do you have? You've got the truma tahira that's forbidden to the non-kohanim, you've got the chulin that's permitted to the kohanim. But what do we say? We say if 100 times more of the permissible against the forbidden, it nullifies it. Then, as we say, you've got to take out another of truma, compensate the kohen with all the different ramifications of that. So Beis Hillel say, so comparably, we could look at our case. You have a case of truma tameya, it's forbidden to the kohanim. You have truma tahara, that's permissible to the kohanim. So we've got a similar kind of setup, the permissible and the forbidden. Got 100 times more, it should nullify it. Basically, what's the difference between the truma tahara being nullified in the chulin and the truma tameya being nullified in the truma tahara? Amar lehem Beis Shammai responded to them, nope, can't compare. That which we find, that chulin that is more lenient, that is permissible, and it's more lenient because permissible to even non-kohanim, that can go ahead and nullify the pure truma that fell in. Ta'ala truma hachamura ha'asura lezarim es hatameya. The more stringent truma, which is the one that is right. Ta'ala truma hachamura. Truma that is more stringent because the truma that is more stringent, that is forbidden to the non-kohanim es hatameya, will it nullify the tamei? And let me explain like this. Beis Shammai is saying like this. You got to look at the majority substance that's doing the nullifying. So in the regular case, you have truma tahira. Yes, it's forbidden to the zarim, and the chulin is permissible to everyone. It's the chulin that's nullifying the truma. Chulin is very lenient. Truma is permissible to everyone. Its permissibility is universal. It's a much stronger form of permissibility. That is the kind of majority substance that we find can nullify something that's forbidden. But on that he says that, but Shammai says that ta'al truma chamura asur lezarim. But shall you say that truma, right? In our case, the majority substance is the truma tahara. That's forbidden to zarim. Now, yes, relative to the kohanim, it's permissible, but its permissibility is much less. It's a more stringent type of thing. Will you say that can be mavato, that can nullify as a tameya, the truma tameya? I mean, Beis Shammai says you can't compare the two and just say, well, the truma tahara is forbidden, the chulin is forbidden, so too, the truma tameya, forbidden to the kohanim, truma tahara is permissible to the kohanim, follow the same setup, let it nullify itself. Beis Shammai says, no, you got to look at the majority substance. You got to look at it and say, look, if we find that chulin can nullify, that's because chulin, regarding its permissibility, is stronger. It's universal. That has the ability to nullify. But are you going to tell me, can you compare something like Truma Tahara, which is only permissible to Kohanim? You're going to tell me that also, based on what you see by chulin, is going to be able to nullify? You can't compare the two. The chulin that nullifies is more permissible. It has more permissibility. So it makes more sense to say it can nullify, but you can't compare it to something else. You can't compare that, compare it to it. Something like Truma Tahara, which is only permissible to Kohanim. It's forbidden to non-Kohanim. So it doesn't have that same power permissibility to say that it can nullify. Okay? Now, so that's all the Mishnah records about their argument. Beis Hillel made their argument, Beis Shammai made their argument, that's the end. But it's not the end, because the Mishnah then continues, La'achar shahidu, after they admitted. That means eventually Beis Shammai came around to Beis Hillel. And they admitted to Beis Hillel. Based on what argument? Based on what? I mean, Beis Shammai seemed to respond to Beis Hillel's argument. What did Beis Hillel say back? So the Bartanur brings down from Yerushalmi. Beis Hillel said like this: Uma truma tahira shiba misa eitzel hazarim oila, truma that's tar, that falls into chulin. Right? Truma tar, if it's eaten by a zar, it carries a punishment of death. It carries a punishment of karas, of divine severance of one's life. If that can go ahead and become nullified, Tameya shiba asay eitzel koyin lekol shekain, truma tameya, a koyin is not to partake from it. It's only if he does partake from it, he doesn't have a punishment of death. He doesn't even transgress a law, a prohibition. He disobeys a positive commandment. So if you're going to, so Beis Hillel argued back to Beis Shammai and said that Truma Tahara, which is more stringent than Truma Tameya, carries a greater punishment, it can become nullified. All the more so, we should say Truma Tameya, which doesn't carry any kind of punishment with it, and it's only a disobey. It's a much lesser level prohibition. When you're only disobeying a positive commandment, it certainly should become nullified. That was Beis Shammai. That was Beis Hillel's argument back. The problem is that they're not coming from the same point. Beis Hillel is focusing on what gets nullified, and Beis Shammai focuses on what's doing the nullification. So even if Beis Hillel say, but look, Truma Tahara, it even carries a punishment of death to those who can't have it, it can become nullified, all the more so Truma Tameya to a Kohen. But Beis Shammai's whole point was, but look, don't look at what's getting nullified, look at what does the nullifying. What does the nullifying, is, according to Beis Shammai, is more important. Chulin can nullify. Its permissibility is greater. You can't learn from that Truma Tahara can nullify what its permissibility is less. So the commentaries explain that what Beis Hillel really meant to say was, Beis Hillel says, take a look. I mean, even though Beis Hillel uses I'm not so sure how well it fits into the words, because Hillel was focusing on the fact that Truma Tahara is b'misa, but what he really meant, it means like this. The commentaries explain it means like this. We know that when it came to Truma, it was the sages who instituted 100 times more. All other situations of nullification, the most you need is 60 times more. Sometimes you just need a majority. But according to Torah law, you never need 100 times more. But the sages said, look at Truma. Truma, it's a serious thing. It carries a punishment of Misa. We're not going to be so lenient on nullifying that. We're going to be more strict when it comes to nullifying it. And therefore we said 100 times more. There's another example of where we find the sages were even more stringent when we dealt with nullification. That is regarding Arla. Arla is a law that that a fruit that grew on a tree during the first few years of its growth is forbidden. Now, not only is it forbidden to eat, you're not allowed to have benefit from it. You can't do anything with it. Just got to let it rot. That's pretty stringent. If Arla gets mixed into other produce, you know how much you need more of the other produce to nullify the Arla? You need 200 times more. So you see that when the sages were determining the laws of nullification takes place, what were they focused on? Were they focused on what is nullifying, what gets nullified? You see they're focusing on what gets nullified. That's Beis Hillel's argument back to Beis Shammai. He understands Beis Shammai was focusing on what does the nullifying. But Beis Hillel's argument is, though, that if you look at things, you look at Truma Tahira carries the punishment of Misa, it gets nullified. But what he meant, it's certainly Truma Tameya. What he meant by that is that a Truma Tahira is going to get nullified by 100, right? And the whole idea of 100 was because Truma Tahira is so strict. And that was the whole determining factor of how to do the nullification. So therefore, it only makes sense to say that Truma Tameya should also become nullified. Because you see, the sages focused on what gets nullified, not on what does the nullifying. Okay, now, so la'achar shahidu, after Beis Shammai agreed to Beis Hillel, that in the case of Truma Tameya that fell into 100 of Truma Tahira, that it could become nullified. Okay, so now it's nullified. Now, if the Truma Tameya is nullified, then what happens to it? As we said before, it's not Truma and it's not Tameya, according to the letter of the law. It's all nullified. But now what do we say? Okay, so now you got to compensate the Kohen for the Truma that he lost. You got to take out a of Truma and give it to the Kohen. So Rebbe Lezer says, Teirah Misisarif, raise it up and burn it. That we had that phrase before. And what that really means is that according to Rebbe Lezer, what gets raised up is just like what fell in. We've had that already previously. If what fell in was Truma Tameya, then what gets raised up is Truma Tameya. That's how you have to treat it. And when in a case like this, where really it was nullified, but we instituted, you have to compensate the Kohen. And when we instituted that, according to Belezer, we give it the same laws as what started. If we give that to the Kohen to use for fuel, we're afraid he's going to eat it because he's going to say, this was nullified. He's not going to take it as serious. And therefore, Belezer said, in this kind of case, you raise it up because we always do that. But then you burn it, meaning burn it, let it rot. You don't give it to the Kohen because we're afraid he's going to misuse it. That's Belezer's opinion. The Chachamim say, of the b'miuta, it has vanished due to its smallness. So what that means is like this. The Chachamim basically saying, I don't have to raise up anything from here. The minority Truma Tameya that fell in was nullified by 100 times more of the Truma Tahira, and that's it. It's gone. I don't have to pay attention to it anymore. Basically, I don't have to, even though typically I have to go ahead and raise up I have to take out a Truma that fell in to compensate the Kohen. Here I don't have to do that. Why? Because at the end of the day, who's going to get this pile? The rest of the pile, who gets it? The Kohen has to get it because it's still Truma. So at the end of the day, the Kohen's getting it. So if we leave this Truma Tameya that became nullified, we leave it in there. So what's going to happen? The Kohen's going to get everything. He's not going to lose out whatsoever. There's no need to raise up anything in this case. It becomes nullified. It becomes Truma Tahira, and it all goes to the Kohen. He lands up with 101. I'm sorry. Yeah, he ends up with 101 anyway because it's Truma Tahira. Not only that, he gains over the fact that Truma Tameya was nullified and he doesn't have to treat it like Truma Tameya, that'll be a discussion soon. But he'll definitely be able to treat it better than regular Truma Tameya that he uses for fuel. So since the whole purpose of taking out a sa'at to compensate the Kohen is for his loss, and there's no loss here, say the Chum, you don't have to do anything. You don't have to do that. All right. However, based on the previous Mishnah that we had before in a similar case, where we said that Truma Tameya fell into, I think in the previous case it was Chulin, and it was nullified. So we said that although it's nullified, and according to the letter of the law, it's not Truma, it's not Chulin, it's not Tamei. Nonetheless, we had a concept that the Truma Tameya that falls in is dormant. It's not completely gone. It's dormant. Were you to go ahead and pull up some of this grain and add it to other impure grain, so that now what I have is a majority of impure grain, meaning which I will say that even though the previously the Truma Tameya that fell became nullified, but it's chayz of an air. It can reawaken. It's dormant. It can reawaken if it now combines with more tamei substance, and then if it becomes the majority, there's no more nullification. It's going to come back to being truma tameya. So in that, when we were concerned with that kind of thing, we said there's very specific ways of how you have to now treat what you have left over, what you're separating, or what either what it is, what you separated, give the kohen, or what left over. You have to make sure that there is no possibility of having the truma tameya make the tahara impure. Now, in this case, this is what you could have. You have here truma tahara, which truma tameya got mixed into. It was nullified, but it's dormant. So in that situation, we are concerned there could be possibilities where it will become reawakened. And therefore, in order to avoid that, we said previously that you have to deal with this, with what you have left over, with what you're taking, what you give, with what's being used by the kohen. You have to only eat in specific ways. So as we said before, all these grains, where we're talking about the impure, the pure get mixed together, we're talking about that the grains never touch any kind of liquid, so it's not any kind of, let's say, water or the other liquids that makes them acceptable to tuma. That didn't happen. So just the fact that they're touching each other doesn't cause anything to become tamei. The problem is if you knead a dough and you add water, that's going to make things tamei. And therefore, there were three possibilities of avoiding that problem. Either eat it dry, or use fruit juices that don't render the fruit acceptable to tuma, or make very small doughs, each one being less than the volume of an egg, so that when we say that in this dough there is a mixture of the truma tahara and the dormant truma tameya, since it's less than the volume of an egg, it's not going to convey, because that small amount doesn't convey tuma, and therefore you'll avoid any problems. You'll avoid all problems. So the Yad Avram brings down here that the commentaries point out, although it's not mentioned here in the Mishnah, it should follow that same pattern as before, that even when they say you don't have to go ahead and raise up the truma because there's no reason to, nonetheless, I am left here with a mixture of truma tahara and dormant truma tameya, and therefore, in order to make sure that that doesn't get reawakened, I have to therefore use it in a way that there should be no possibility of tuma being spread from the dormant truma tameya to the truma tahara. Okay, next is two mitzvahs. Mitzvahs leisasa shleilavei alachais aviv. Prohibition against being intimate with one's father's sister. Shenamar, as it says, Erbas hachais avicha leisegalei. One should not be intimate. The nakedness of your father's sister you shall not reveal. Prohibition against being intimate with one's mother's sister. As it says, don't be intimate with the sister of your mother. Okay, so we have two prohibitions. One prohibition on your father's sister, one prohibition on your mother's sister. It makes a difference whether this woman is your father's sister, whether they share only the same father or only the same mother. The same thing when it comes to your mother's sister. Even if she is your mother's sister just from the father or just from the mother, and even if, let's say, this was a sister of your father or your mother who was born out of wedlock. At the end of the day, it is your father's sister, again, whether it's from the same mother, the same father, or it's your father's sister, and they're going to be forbidden. And the liability, the punishment for each one of these forbidden women, is unintentionally carries a punishment of kares, divine severance of one's life, even if there are witnesses and warning. There's no capital punishment administered. And if it was done unintentionally, carries a sin offering. This applies in all places and at all times. Have a great day.